If you hear something moving where no one should be, don't go looking for it. Because in these stories, the moment they realized what was happening, it was already too close.
History 1. The handprint was already on the glass when I entered the cabin, and the snow outside was untouched. The window completely covered in white frost, except for 5 clear marks pressed into the surface. Fingers spread, palm flat, facing inward, at the height of a standing face. I stopped in the doorway. The interior, dark, wooden walls, a bed against the far side, a table with 2 chairs. A cold stove in the corner, no movement, no sound. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The lock engaged with a single click. I turned back to the window. The handprint was in the same position, same shape, no change. I walked closer, boots sounding dull against the wooden floor, and I looked at the snow outside. Smooth, no tracks leading to the wall. No marks under the window, nothing disturbed. I stood there, the print in front of me, the empty ground beyond it, and I raised my hand toward the glass without touching it. The size matched. Same spread of fingers, same height. I lowered my hand and stepped back. The room remained still. I turned and checked the door. The lock was engaged. I opened it and stepped onto the porch. The air cold, the snow deep and level. No footprints, no drag marks, no impressions near the wall. I looked up at the window from outside. The handprint was visible from this side. Pressed into the frost, same orientation, same height. I stepped back inside and closed the door. The lock clicked again. I moved to the table and set my bag down. I lit the stove and watched the faint light spread across the walls. The window darkened as the light outside faded. The handprint became more defined against the black glass. White frost surrounding the clear shape of 5 fingers. I sat and watched it. No movement, no change in position. I stood and walked toward the bed, the handprint visible from the side angle. Still aligned at face level, I lay down without removing my boots. Eyes open, facing the window, the shape fixed in place, the room quiet. Then a sound came from the glass. A slow scrape across the surface, like something dragging lightly over the frost. I did not move. The sound stopped. I sat up. The handprint was no longer on the outside. It was on the inside of the glass now, pressed into the frost from within the room, the fingers pointing upward, the palm at the lower edge. I stood and walked toward it, the print sharp, edges clean. No smear. I placed my hand next to it without touching. The size matched again. I stepped back. The print remained. I turned and checked the door. The lock was still engaged. I looked through the small window beside it. The porch was empty, snow undisturbed. I turned back to the main window. The handprint had moved, now centered, higher. Positioned at the height of a standing face looking directly through the glass, I took the flashlight from my bag and aimed it at the window. The beam passed through the clear areas and reflected back. The frost glowing white around the shape. And in the reflection on the glass, something stood behind me. I turned immediately. The room was empty. The bed, the table, the stove, the walls. No one there. I turned back to the window. The handprint was gone. The glass completely frosted again. Uniform white, no marks. I stood in the center of the room with the flashlight in my hand. The beam steady, and a breath sounded from behind me. Short, close to ear level, visible in the cold air. I turned. The space was empty. I moved the light across the room. Corners, ceiling, floor, nothing present. I stepped toward the door, the lock still engaged. I looked through the side window, the porch empty, the snow untouched. I turned back toward the room, and the beam crossed a small mirror on the wall above the stove. Round, tarnished frame. And in the reflection, a woman stood behind me, height similar to mine, wearing a long white garment that reached the floor, arms at her sides, fingers long, nails dark, her face visible, pale skin, eyes open, mouth closed, features aligned but wrong. Too still, too close. I turned. The space behind me was empty. I turned back to the mirror. She was closer, positioned directly behind where I stood. I raised the flashlight and aimed it at the space behind me. The beam passed through, nothing blocking it. I looked back at the mirror, her head tilted slightly forward, eyes directed at me. No blink, no movement except the tilt. I stepped toward the door. The reflection followed, maintaining distance behind me. I reached for the handle. In the mirror, her arm lifted, hand extending toward my shoulder. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, the cold air sharp. I turned back toward the cabin, the interior visible through the window, the mirror reflecting the room. She stood in the center now, facing the glass, facing me, posture straight, face level with the window. I closed the door and locked it from the outside. I stepped away, moving down the path I had made earlier. The snow compact under my boots. I reached my vehicle, parked down the road, and got inside. I closed the door and looked forward, then into the rear-view mirror, the cabin visible behind me through the back window. A white figure standing at the cabin window, aligned with the glass. I turned my head and looked back through the rear window. Nothing there. I looked again at the mirror. The figure was still visible. Same position. I turned the key. The engine started. I shifted into drive and moved forward. The road ahead dark, snow falling steadily. I looked at the mirror again. The figure was no longer at the cabin. It was in the back seat reflection, seated directly behind me, upright, facing forward, her face aligned with the center of the mirror. I turned quickly. The back seat was empty. I faced forward again. The mirror showed her in the same position. I adjusted the mirror angle. She moved with it, staying aligned behind my reflection. I reached back with my hand, the seat empty. I lowered my hand. The mirror showed her closer now, her face near mine in the reflection. I slowed the vehicle and stopped. I turned off the engine. The sound cut out. I looked at the mirror. She remained. Same position, same distance. I opened the door and stepped out into the snow. I walked around to the back of the vehicle and opened the rear door. The seat empty. No marks, no movement. I closed the door and returned to the driver's seat. I looked at the mirror again. She was gone. Only the road behind me, the cabin in the distance, a faint light visible through the window. I drove forward without stopping, the road stretching ahead, no other vehicles, no lights. I did not look at the mirror again. I reached the main road and continued until the cabin was no longer visible. I did not return. The next morning, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. I answered. "Ah." A voice spoke, low, clear, female, saying 3 words. "I am inside." The line ended. I turned the phone off and removed the battery. I drove to another town and left the vehicle there. I did not go back. I did not contact anyone. And later that night, in a different place, a different room, I looked at a window and saw a handprint forming slowly on the inside of the glass. 5 fingers, palm flat, facing inward, at the height of my face, and the surface of the window around it remained untouched. History 2. The temperature inside the cabin dropped in less than an hour, and the thermometer on the wall stopped moving at -40, the glass over it covered in frost from the inside. My breath visible in short bursts that stayed in the air longer than they should. The fire in the stove was lit, but it did not warm the room. The flames low and steady, the wood not changing, not breaking. Not turning to ash, I sat at the table, with the notebook open and the pen in my hand, and I watched the air in front of me turn white every time I exhaled. The room quiet, no wind through the walls, no sound from outside. I stood and walked to the window, and the glass was cold enough to burn. Thick ice spreading across it in sharp lines, not random, forming patterns that moved slowly toward the center. Outside, the snow was falling, but not drifting, coming down straight and heavy, covering everything in a flat layer. The other cabins in the distance dark, no lights, no movement. I looked down below the window, and the snow was smooth except for a line of footprints leading from the road to my door. Small, bare feet, toes clearly visible in the surface. No shoe marks, no drag, no other tracks around them, just one line that ended at the entrance. I stepped back from the window and walked to the door and checked the lock. It was engaged. I leaned closer and looked through the small window beside it. The porch empty, the snow outside undisturbed, except for the prints that stopped at the threshold. I stood there for a moment, and then I heard it. A short sound from outside, like a laugh. Quiet but clear, too close to the door. I did not move. It came again. Same tone, same distance. I stepped back into the room and picked up the flashlight and turned it on and moved the beam across the walls, the ceiling, the floor. Nothing there. I turned back to the window, and the frost had covered almost all of it now, except for a small clear circle at the height of my face. I raised the light and aimed it through that space, and there was someone outside. Standing still, a child, thin, no coat, no shoes, hair short and light, skin pale, eyes open, looking straight at me, no expression, no movement. I lowered the light for a second and raised it again. The child had not moved. Same position, same distance. The snow around them smooth. No new footprints. I stepped closer to the glass, and the circle of clear space widened slightly as the frost shifted. The face became clearer. The eyes did not blink. The mouth did not move. I turned toward the door and grabbed the handle and pulled. It did not move. Ice had formed around the edges, locking it in place. I pulled again harder. The handle stayed fixed. I let go and turned back to the window, and the child was no longer outside. The glass was still clear in that circle, but there was nothing beyond it, just the falling snow. I stood there and listened, and then I heard breathing behind me, close to ear level, slow, steady. I turned quickly, and the room was empty, the beam of the flashlight moving across the walls. The bed, the stove, nothing there. I turned back to the window and the circle was still clear, and now the face was there again, but not outside, pressed against the inside of the glass. The skin touching the surface, the breath fogging it from this side, the eyes fixed on me, the same distance as before, but now, inside the room. I stepped back and raised the light, and the beam passed through the head without casting a shadow. The wall behind remained the same. I lowered the light, and the child was still there. I moved toward the stove, and the flames were gone, the wood covered in a thin layer of ice, the metal cold. I turned back, and the child was no longer at the window. The clear circle shrinking as the frost closed over it again. I stood in the middle of the room and listened. No movement, no sound. Then a soft step behind me. I turned, and the child stood near the table. Closer now, same posture, arms at the sides, feet just above the floor, not touching it. I did not move. The child did not move. I shifted my weight, and the child shifted the same distance, maintaining the space between us. I stepped back once, and the child stepped forward once, closing it. I raised the flashlight and aimed it at the face. The skin smooth, too smooth, the eyes open. No reflection in them. I lowered the light, and the child smiled, the mouth opening slightly, teeth visible, straight and thin. I stepped toward the door again and grabbed the handle. The skin of my hand stuck to the metal for a moment before I pulled it away. I did not look down. I kept my eyes on the room. The child moved again, closer, the distance now less than an arm's length. I could see the breath coming from its mouth, slow and even. I turned toward the window, and the frost had opened again, the circle clear, and another set of footprints was visible outside. Identical to the first, leading from the same direction to the same point at the door. I looked back at the child, and it was still there. I looked at the floor, and a thin layer of ice had formed around its feet. And there, I have. Spreading slowly across the wood toward me, I stepped back, and it stopped. I stepped forward, and it moved again, reaching my boots. I froze in place, and the ice held where it was. I raised the flashlight again, and the beam shook slightly in my hand. The child did not blink, did not breathe faster, did not change. I heard a second breath behind me. I did not turn. I saw it in the reflection of the window, another child standing directly behind where I was. Same height, same posture, same face, both of them looking at me. I stayed still. The air in my chest cold, my breath slower now. I moved one step toward the table, and both reflections moved with me, maintaining position, one in front, one behind. I reached for the notebook with my free hand, and the pages were frozen together. The pen stuck where I had left it. I looked at the window again, and the frost had spread fully across the glass. No clear space left. No view outside, just white. I turned slowly, and the child in front of me was closer than before, less than a step away. I could see the texture of the skin now, smooth and pale. I did not raise the light. I did not move. I heard the second one step forward behind me, the sound of bare skin against frozen wood. I closed my eyes for a second and opened them again. The child in front had not changed. I looked at the door, and the ice covered it completely now, the frame sealed. I did not try the handle again. I looked back at the child, and it raised one hand slowly, fingers extending toward my chest. I did not move. I did not step back. The distance closed until the fingers stopped just short of touching me, the cold from them visible in the air. Mask. I held still, and the room stayed silent. Then both of them moved at the same time, one step closer, the space gone, and the cold moved through my clothes into my skin. I tried to breathe, and the air did not move. I looked down, and the ice had reached my legs, holding them in place. I looked back up, and both faces were level with mine, eyes open, mouths closed. I did not move. I could not move. The light from the flashlight dimmed, the beam weakening, the edges of the room fading. The last thing I saw was the reflection of both of them in the frozen window. One in front of me, one directly behind, both the same, both still, and then the light went out. Story 3. The loom started at 11:47 p.m., and I was on the second floor when I heard it. Clack, clack, steady and even, coming from below, from the basement. I held the flashlight, and the beam moved slightly in my hand. I walked to the stairs, and each step creaked under my boots. The air smelled damp and thick. I reached the basement door, and it was open. I had closed it earlier. I pushed it wider and entered the weaving room. Machines covered in dust, metal frames still, no power in the building. One loom in the center was moving, the shuttle sliding back and forth, the pedal going down and up, no one sitting at it. I walked closer, and the sound increased. Clack, clack, faster. I aimed the flashlight at the seat. Black thread, wound on the spindle, clean, no dust on it. I lowered the light to the floor, and footprints were visible in the dust. Small, bare feet leading to the back wall. I followed them, and they stopped at a crack in the plaster. Narrow, vertical, dark inside. A single black thread extended from the crack to the loom, pulled tight. Moving slightly with each motion of the machine, I did not touch it. I stepped back, and the crack was wider than before, large enough to see into. I aimed the light inside, and 2 points reflected back. Fixed in place, I lowered the flashlight, and the thread snapped. The loom stopped, the room silent. I turned and walked to the stairs, without looking back. I reached the second floor, and the sound started again. Clack, clack, louder. I continued to the first floor, and the sound spread through the building. From every room, steady, I entered the sewing room. Chairs arranged in a circle, empty. A table in the center with gray fabric piled on it. I stepped closer, and the fabric shifted slightly. I aimed the flashlight, and the chairs were no longer empty. Figures sat in them, heads lowered, hands moving, stitching the fabric with short, repeated motions. I stopped, and their hands stopped. All heads lifted at the same time and turned toward me, faces pale, eyes dark, no reflection in them. The nearest one opened her mouth and spoke, voice low, "Come here." I did not move. The others did not speak, but I heard the same words. The shift never ends. So, I stepped back, and the loom sound from the basement increased. Clack, clack, fast. The figures stood at the same time, chairs scraping the floor. They walked toward me, no sound from their feet. I turned and ran to the stairs. I reached the first floor and looked back. The room was empty, chairs still, fabric on the table, no one there. I continued to the exit, and the door was closed. I pulled the handle, and it did not move. I looked through the glass, the parking lot empty, no lights. I stood still, and the loom stopped. Silence filled the hall. Then, breathing started behind me. Close, level with my ear, steady. I did not turn. I looked at the glass, and a reflection formed. A figure standing behind me, tall, thin, wrapped in black thread. Layers tight around the body, face covered with fabric pulled flat, no features visible, hands holding shears, long, rusted. I turned, and the space behind me was empty. I looked back at the glass, and the figure was closer, the shears raised. I pushed the door again, and it opened. I ran outside, and got into my vehicle, and locked the doors. I looked at the building through the windshield. Lights turned on inside, one by one. Upper floor, second floor, first floor, basement, all lit. I started the engine and drove. I checked the rearview mirror, and the figure stood at the entrance, facing the vehicle. I kept driving. I looked again, and the figure was in the back seat. Reflection, sitting upright, wrapped in thread. The shears resting across its lap. I turned my head, and the seat was empty. I faced forward again, and the reflection showed it closer. I reached back with my hand and touched nothing. I lowered my arm, and the shears were now on the passenger seat, metal dark, edges worn. I slowed the vehicle and stopped. I opened the door, and the shears fell to the ground. I left them there and drove away. I reached home and entered and locked the door. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and black thread was visible in my hair. Woven through, I pulled it, and it held. I pulled again, and the skin moved with it. I stopped. I looked at my hands, and thread was under my fingernails, dark, fixed in place. I looked at my teeth, and thread was between them. I did not try to remove it. I stood at the sink, and the faucet turned on. Water running, dark strands moving with it. I turned it off, and the loom started again. Clack, clack, coming from the walls. I did not move. The sound increased from all sides. I looked at the mirror, and the reflection showed the figure behind me, closer than before, the shears raised near my neck. I did not turn. I watched the reflection. The blades moved slightly, opening, closing. I could hear them over the loom. I stayed still. The thread under my nails tightened, pulling. The sound matched my heartbeat. Clack, clack. I tried to move and my hands did not respond. I kept looking at the mirror, and the fabric over its face shifted, opening at the mouth. And a voice came from behind me, close. The shift never ends. The light went out, and the mirror went dark. The sound continued, steady, and the next morning, the bathroom door was locked from the inside. The mirror covered in black thread, woven tight across the surface, no reflection visible. Inside, one figure stood at the sink, wrapped in thread, hands resting on the counter. And on the mirror, 3 words were formed, with the thread clear and even. Welcome to the shift.